The most interesting guests in the music industry, entertainment, art, and politics step into the studio for Turning Point with Frank MacKay. And now, Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
Welcome to Turning Point. Our very special guest today is sports, radio, and television personality Ann Liguori. Ann Liguori has shot over 600, and that's right, 600 interviews with some of the sports legends in history of sports. Just unbelievable talent, and she certainly has established herself for a young woman. And you've had some career, let me tell you. Welcome, Ann.
Well, thank you, and thanks for calling me young. I love that.
Well, I don't think anybody that would look at your picture would disagree with that. You certainly have done a lot in your short time. But how long have you been at it?
Oh my gosh! Well, I have to tell you, I'm one of the originals at WFAN Radio, and we're celebrating our 25th anniversary. I was the first woman to host a sports call-in show on WFAN, Frank, and
for those who don't know,
20 years later, I was doing the show.
For those who don't know, WFAN is a New York-based station, and I know it's all over the country through Yes, and different people pick that up. But when you talk about WFAN, people in other states should understand that this was really the satellite that started all these other sports stations going. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah, WFAN was the first all-sports radio station in the country, starting back in 1987, when very few people thought, oh my goodness, an all-sports radio station would even work. And I always knew it was a great idea. It was one of the top billing stations for many, many years, could still be, but it basically opened up the door for hundreds of other all-sports radio stations across the country. So it's been a lovely, exciting road, and I did a call-in show for many, many years on the station, talking about all sports, and I continue to cover golf and tennis for WFAN, covering the Masters and the U.S. Open and U.S. Open Tennis Championships. So, the Ryder Cup, whatever is going on in golf and tennis. So it's been a wonderful adventure.
What did you do just prior to FAN?
Well, I came up to New York right out of college, which was in itself an adventure as a recipient of the International Radio and TV Society Fellowship, which was a great experience. They basically every year bring various students and graduates up to New York for a fellowship, and it puts you right in New York City, and part of the experience, in addition to the fellowship, is just rubbing elbows with some of the movers and shakers in broadcasting. So it was just an incredible entree to the whole broadcasting scene in New York. And a lot of the young people would leave after that experience to go get jobs elsewhere. But I stayed in New York and basically never left. So all these years later, I continue to work in the business. I've been independent my whole career. I've been my own boss, freelancing and doing independent projects all these years, which has worked for me. But it's been a lot of fun. My first position out of that fellowship program was at CBS Sports back in the days when Brent Musburger and Phyllis George co-hosted the NFL Today show. And then from there, I got an opportunity to produce at ABC Radio Network when Howard Cosell was still around, and he was, the voice of ABC Sports, both, the network television and radio. And funny story about that, when I was one of my first days on the job as a freelance producer at ABC Radio Network, I listened to a commentary that Howard Cosell had done, and it had already gone out to all the ABC affiliates in the morning, and I knew it was going to be repeated later in the day, but he had made a mistake, and we were getting a lot of calls from various affiliates, and so I made the decision to call him at home to correct him, and the engineer at the time almost fell off his chair when I told him that I was going to call Howard, because it was really early in my work there. I was very young. I had not met him in person yet, and so I found his home number, called him, and dialed the number, and he answered the phone. And I said, Howard, this is Ann Liguori. You may not know me. I'm new here. but you had said this and you meant to say that, so could you please just redo that one line? I'll edit it into the commentary, and then it'll be great. Well, there was this long pause, Frank.
I can imagine.
My engineer was just incredibly, he couldn't believe that I had done this. I was calling Howard at home. And all of a sudden you hear this voice, this voice from the heavens. He said, Do you know who I am, young lady? This is Howard Cosell. I don't make mistakes. Well, I thought my career was over. I was in my early 20s at the time, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, what have I done?
Yeah.
But basically, I just had to come up with a quick response, and I said, well, Mr. Cosell, you do want this to be perfect. You normally don't make mistakes, but we happen to catch this one. So
wow.
As a producer, it's my job to correct it and make it perfect. So, all right, young lady. So he did it, and that was it.
Wow.
And obviously never forgot my name, and it was quite a way for me to start my little position there at ABC all those years.
You're not kidding. What was your relationship with him after that? Did you have any interaction with him?
He respected me. We had always had great chats when we would see each other at the network and at various sporting events. And as I say, I think it really helped me that I stood up to him. So many people were intimidated by him back then. There weren't that many other networks back then. It was ABC was the sports network, and certainly Howard Cosell was the guy, and this was obviously toward the tail end of his career. So
incredible.
He wasn't always the nicest guy. He was always a little crabby, if you ask me.
Yeah. How was it?
It was fun. It was fun to get to know him and just to kind of be able to say I worked with him, because he was a genius at doing these commentaries, and he was an orator, an attorney, and he could speak for 60 seconds without a stopwatch, with no script, and it would be incredible radio, just very compelling. And I've never really experienced anybody since then who could do it as well as Howard Cosell did. So it was a great experience just working with him for a short period of time.
Well, he certainly made it an art form. I mean, hindsight is 20/20, and if we can jump back to the idea of an all sports station, radio station, it sounds ridiculous to say, but a lot of people were doubtful. There were a lot of skeptic people that really didn't feel like this was going to work. I mean, do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I had a penny for everybody who said, "Are you kidding me? An all sports station? No way." Again, I was very young. I came to New York, from a small town in Ohio. I grew up in Brecksville, Ohio, and went to school at University of South Florida. And here I was in the Big Apple, and had been here for a few years before WFAN, was getting off the ground back in 1987. And but seeing all the sports teams, professional and collegiate, in the New York metropolitan area, I knew it was a great idea. And the sports fans in New York are incredibly passionate and knowledgeable, and that alone really helps WFAN through the years, has helped WFAN through the years, because of the passion and the knowledge of the sports fans who will listen, to the various hosts talk Mets, Yankees, Jets, Giants, and top issues in sports. So to me it was a no-brainer, but back then, as you say, there were a lot of people who were skeptic.
We're here with Ann Liguori.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay returns right after this. Welcome back to Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
We're here with Ann Liguori. You're covering sports still. You're covering golf and tennis, and you would think there's not a lot of excitement that goes along, but there's some celebrity always. I mean, throughout the years, celebrity tennis players, and it crosses over into the gossip, and then of course, Tiger Woods. Were you covering golf when the Tiger Woods?
Oh yeah. I mean, I cover all sports still. I mean, for WFAN, I cover golf and tennis. I do other shows where I have a radio show called Sports Interview with Ann Liguori on PeconicPublicBroadcasting.org every Saturday from 9 to 10 Eastern, and I talk about all sports still, because I love being able to kind of get on my soapbox about any specific sport. But getting back to golf, yes, I did a show for the Golf Channel. I was the first woman to host and produce a an independent show for the Golf Channel, which aired the first 6 years of the Golf Channel's inception. And that show gave me the opportunity to talk to different celebrities who had a passion for golf. So in addition to talking to Tiger and different, professional golfers, I also talked to everybody from Alice Cooper and Joe Pesci, Kevin Costner, Sylvester Stallone, Celine Dion, Sugar Ray Leonard, Smokey Robinson. I mean, just a whole variety of personalities in music and Hollywood and sports and politics who really love golf. And that became a book that I wrote called A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game. But yes, getting back to Tiger, in fact, I was on the Today Show frequently talking about, Tiger and the whole scandal. So I've been covering, all the major tournaments for many, many years and have, basically covered Tiger since the day he turned professional. So it's been an interesting sport. Plus, just the Ryder Cup has, I cover the Ryder Cup every other year, and that's just that alone is one of the most exciting sporting events on the planet.
Well, let's go back to the Tiger Woods scandal. And I don't want to get into the inner workings of the scandal or whatever, but from a media standpoint, historically, where do you put the Tiger Woods scandal? I mean, of the amount of coverage that it got. I think the New York Post broke all kinds of records for being on the front cover, Tiger somewhere being there. Have you seen anything like that from a media standpoint since you've been around?
Never, because, here's a guy who was the most revered athlete on the planet, Frank, all those years, and really could do nothing wrong because of his so-called clean image and because of his incredibly amazing golf game. Winning, all those majors and winning so many of those majors in record-breaking fashion, and just nobody could beat him throughout, the majority of his career. And to go from being the most revered athlete on the planet to, really a joke. Yeah. He was ridiculed and joked about on all the talk shows, and it was his fault. I'm not saying it was, not warranted, but what a fall from grace. So yes, I think it was the biggest sports story in that regard of any sports story that I've ever covered.
What rivals it? You've been covering sports for a while now. OJ, I don't know if that's even a sports story. That takes the cake. That has to, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned, that's a good point. Because of who OJ, was, his sports career, even though that was obviously a news story, but it involved, again, an athlete like O.J. Simpson, who was really on the A-list of every party, of every invite, he managed to gain access to, this very rare stratosphere of celebrity. And to go from that to where he is now, and with everything in between, sure, that was a huge fall from grace. So I think probably, Tiger, obviously what Tiger did doesn't compare to, what O.J. Simpson
right. Well,
did.
Yeah. Let's put
and
that,
got away
let's
with, by the way,
right?
Because he's in prison for something else,
right.
Not murdering his wife. But yeah, that story has to be just the biggest story in sports, absolutely, with Tiger a close second.
Our special guest is Ann Liguori, and we're speaking to Ann Liguori really about the business of broadcasting. Ann, you mentioned Harold Cosell. Did you ever work with O.J.?
When I was doing the Conversations with Ann Liguori show at the Golf Channel at the time of the whole O.J. Simpson, debacle, and one of the producers just kind of said, well, I was going out and getting all these celebrities as my guests and independently hosting and producing the show and booking the guests. I kind of, ran the whole production. And so one of the producers had said, well, can you get O.J.? And at the time, Frank, I did not want to go near the guy. I know it wasn't probably a reaction that most journalists would have given. They probably would have jumped at the chance to talk to him, but I was so sickened by, everything that I was hearing and seeing, and I followed the trial very closely. And
you're talking about prior. You're talking about post-murder. not
Right,
prima.
yeah, but no, I'd known OJ and I had met him at several sports functions, but no, I had never interviewed him.
Yeah, I mean, just an amazing story. I mean, that's the story of the century, I guess, when you come down to sports, and I'm talking last
unfortunately,
century.
those stories are both stories that have happened, obviously, away from their so-called sport, but that's the way it goes, right?
Yeah,
sports is a microcosm of life, and and look at Lance Armstrong. I mean, now for years, people were murmuring about Lance Armstrong and taking performance-enhancing drugs, and the fact that so many bikers in that cyclists in that sport do, and the fact that he continually denies it, to me, is just amazing. But that I guess the question is, are we desensitized at this point by our sports so-called heroes cheating?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a theme that we could explore, year-round, because unfortunately there are a lot of athletes who do cheat and have gotten away with it. But I think this Lance Armstrong story is a huge story in sports, because for all these years, Frank, he was
beyond reproach.
Not only Lance, but his whole, some other members of his team. He was encouraging other members of his team, according to a lot of the testimony that I've read, to take drugs and to get drugs and to hide the fact that they were taking these drugs, and I've read about when he had his ex-masseuse was doing errands for him to bring him the drugs, and he just bullied her for years with lawsuits and calling her all kinds of names, and that's an incredible story too. And I think that plus look what happened at Penn State with Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky. I mean, we're seeing all these stories that have developed out of the sports arena, and they're just incredible stories. Unfortunately, they're all very negative stories.
Yeah.
But that's why I try sometimes to really go out of my way to look for the positive in sports, because it's supposed to be an escape. It's not supposed to be this hard, ugly news that it's become often.
Yeah. We're here with Ann Liguori.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay returns right after this. Welcome back to Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
We're in a 24-hour news cycle. We're here with Ann Liguori. And Ann, you worked in the media, and specifically sports media, prior to the 24-hour news cycle, and certainly we're in the midst of it now. You can't do anything without it being, newsworthy if you're a major celebrity. I mean, tell me the difference between working prior to the 24-hour news cycle and now.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because I think, as a journalist, for us who have worked before this whole social media phenomenon, we have to really learn now how to use it. And some people have jumped right into it and are very successful at it. But yeah, I mean, from a news standpoint, though, these everybody, whether you're an athlete or a journalist or anybody, just has to be so careful what they're putting on Facebook and what they're tweeting, because it's immediate news. And I have found that overall it's a little scary, because a lot of stories go up that where writers don't fact check, or it's an instant it's like published instantly. It's out there for everybody to see. So I think we run into stories that some aren't true, and a lot of rumors get started that are very damaging. So I just think, the technology is incredible, but I think there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with that technology that, journalists have to be very, aware of, and especially young people, because they grow up, tweeting and being on the internet, and maybe before they even go to journalism school, they need to learn, the importance of fact-checking and being solid reporters, and not getting stories out there to the masses unless they're 100% sure that everything's accurate.
I heard a public official once say, and this was, I guess, in the advent of the phones having cameras, the cell phones having cameras, and this was a it won't be specific who it was, but it was someone who certainly lived a little loose in his social life, let's say, and he said those cameras on the phone, he said, that's going to be the death of us. That's a disaster. And the truth of the matter is, I mean, everybody at this point is potentially rivaling paparazzi. I mean, never mind hiding from the paparazzi. If you're a celebrity, you certainly have to watch that some 14-year-old kid doesn't recognize who you are, and he catches you doing something, he or she catches you doing something wrong, and then tweets the next minute. Not only is there access to get photos or to get footage of a celebrity that acting inappropriately or acting newsworthy, let's say, but they have access to put it out. And some of these people have thousands of friends or followers, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's a different world.
Sure. I mean, look at Michael Phelps. He ran into that trouble when he, was at a party and was smoking marijuana, and somebody tweeted the picture for everybody to see. So, it was all athletes have to be aware of that. Anybody, famous has to be aware of that. And then the flip side of that is sometimes people who do these kinds of things who aren't famous get famous because of doing crazy things. So our society has become just a very immediate, very you're only as good as your last story, your last tweet. And, you just have to be so careful what goes out there.
And getting back to your career, what was the turning point in your life, or if you prefer, what was the turning point in your career?
Well, I started out as a journalist and as a producer. I was writing for USA Today for the sports pages, and then I was freelancing, as I mentioned, as a producer for ABC Radio Network. And then I went to cover the Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles as a producer. And they needed a reporter to go and cover the sport of tennis, which at the time was a demonstration sport in L.A. And not anybody really in the newsroom who was available knew anything about tennis but me. So they asked me if I would go and do reports from the tennis venue. And of course I said, absolutely. I had played tennis in high school on a boys' team. There was not a girls' team in my high school at the time. And so I played number one singles on the boys' team. I walked on the tennis team at University of South Florida briefly before I pursued my broadcast journalism major. So I really followed the sport of tennis and really knew it. And so yes, I went and covered tennis, and that was my break into reporting in sports. I loved it. I went from a producer to a reporter just like that on hundreds of ABC radio networks and Armed Forces Radio Network as well. So.
Yeah.
Armed Forces Radio Network. So, yeah, it was that would be probably my earliest turning point. And then, of course, when WFAN got off the ground back in 1987 and hired me from ABC Radio Network to host my own show, where I continue to host a show, a sports call-in show at WFAN for, over 20 years, and continue to work for the station as their golf and tennis reporter. And I write a column for WFAN.com every week as well. So I think those two were probably the biggest turning points early in my career. And then I would say the third, Frank, was deciding to put my own TV production company together and basically taking the risk and putting a cable show together called Sports Interview with Ann Liguori, in which I went out and packaged the show completely on my own, getting sponsors, getting the networks to carry it. And 15 years later, Sports Interview with Ann Liguori aired every week on cable networks throughout the country and featured these legends in sports, everybody from Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle to Hank Aaron, Brett Favre. I mean, just every sport, every week I would do an interview with a half-hour interview with a different sports personality. And you can actually see the archives of all these interviews on my website at annliguori.com.
Do you have all of them up?
I'm sorry?
Are all of them up there? Are all 600?
Well, they're not. You can't. They're listed. You can't view them. You can actually order them on DVDs on my website. But I haven't put them all up. They're half-hour shows.
Yeah.
So the ones that the people I've interviewed most of them are listed in the archive section on my website at Ann Liguori, and that's AnnLiguori.com.
The body of work you have just involved in that show is amazing. Give the website again.
Yeah, it's AnnLiguori.com. AnnLiguori.com.
And again, we're with Ann Liguori. Ann, what do you do from here? Where do you go?
Well, I'm so busy. I mean, I continue to host radio shows. I continue to cover, golf and tennis for WFAN. I'm working on my second book. I'm working on a documentary about my life and all these incredible legends I've interviewed through the years in sports. I also run a foundation, Frank, called the Ann Liguori Foundation. This is my charitable side, which raises money for cancer prevention and cancer research. And every year I host a golf tournament in the Hamptons for charity, and we do a dinner dance as well. So right now it's 2 events, but believe me, it keeps me busy, and it feels good to be able to help other people and to raise awareness and money for various cancer initiatives.
Ann Liguori, thank you very much for being our guest today.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
And thank you for tuning in. Our special guest has been Ann Liguori. And next week, tune in the same time, Turning Point.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay is brought to you by Herman, Katz, Conjemi & Klein, Duffy & Duffy, Gold Coast Bank, Heartland Business Center, Morgan Stanley and Smith Barney of PC Wealth Management, and the Hagedorn Little Village School in Seaford, New York. Turning Point with Frank MacKay was produced by GVP Digital Media in Ronkonkoma, New York. Executive producers Frank MacKay and Harry Oates. Associate producers Kristen and John MacKay. Audio and studio engineering Brittany Fergo and Francis Kazmarek. Hotel and accommodations provided by Ohika Castle Hotel and Estates in Huntington, New York. Transportation services provided by Mark of Elegance Limousine in Hauppauge, New York. Catering services provided by Cella Bagels of Selden, New York.